The Civil War wasn't just blue and gray, it was black powder and pure madness. Behind the smoke and cannon fire, there were weapons so bizarre, so far ahead of their time, they seemed ripped from science fiction. Imagine a machine gun cranked like a coffee grinder, a grenade that needed to land like a dart, a submarine that vanished with its entire crew after the world's first underwater kill. Some of these inventions were brilliant, others were catastrophic failures, but every one of them was real and used on American soil. These are the 15 most insane weapons of the Civil War, machines that shouldn't have existed, but did. 15. The Coffee Mill Gun. The Civil War's forgotten machine gun. It looked like a coffee grinder, but this was no kitchen tool. The Agar Coffee Mill Gun was one of the Civil War's earliest attempts at a machine gun. Invented in 1861, it used a hand crank to fire up to 120 rounds per minute, a staggering rate in a war dominated by slow-loading muskets. It didn't use standard bullets. Instead, it fired metal tubes preloaded with powder and ball, which fed into the chamber like ammo pods. It even had a water cooling system, a full half-century before machine guns became standard. President Lincoln loved it. He personally test-fired one and ordered several. But military officers didn't trust it. It jammed easily, was heavy, and no one knew how to fit it into their traditional battlefield tactics. Most were used to guard forts and supply lines, not charge into battle. It was decades ahead of its time, but tragically misunderstood. A machine gun in the age of muskets, forgotten before it had a chance to rewrite history. 14. The Ketchum Grenade. The Civil War's flying plunger of death. The Ketchum grenade looked more like a dart or a plunger than a weapon of war, but it was one of the first grenades ever used in American combat. Invented by William Ketchum in 1861, it had a finned tail to keep it stable in flight and a rubber plunger on the nose. When thrown, it had to land tip down to trigger the percussion cap and explode. But that was the problem. If it didn't land perfectly nose first, it just bounced and failed to detonate. Confederate soldiers sometimes picked them up and threw them right back at Union lines. Despite the flaws, Union troops used them in trench warfare, especially during the sieges of Vicksburg and Petersburg. While unreliable, the Ketchum grenade showed that armies were starting to think beyond the bullet. It was a weird, wild, and risky invention, but it paved the way for the hand grenades used in modern wars. 13. The triple-barrel Colt revolver rifle. 3 times the firepower and the danger. What happens when you mix a revolver with a rifle and then triple it? You get one of the strangest and most dangerous weapons of the Civil War, the triple-barrel Colt revolver rifle. This rare experimental firearm featured 3 stacked barrels and a rotating cylinder, allowing it to fire multiple rounds without reloading. The idea was to give soldiers more shots before having to stop and reload, a serious advantage in battle. But the design was a nightmare to use. It was heavy, awkward to aim, and prone to misfires. Even worse, early revolvers had a nasty habit of chain firing, where multiple chambers ignited at once. Now imagine that happening with 3 barrels. Colt quickly realized the design wasn't practical for field use. Only a few were ever made, and fewer survived. Still, the triple-barrel revolver rifle stands as a bold, if reckless, attempt to push firepower to the extreme in an era of slow, single-shot weapons. 12. The LeMat Revolver. The pistol with a secret shotgun. At first glance, the Lamat Revolver looked like any other sidearm, but hidden beneath its main barrel was a deadly surprise, a shotgun. Invented by Jean-Alexandre LeMat, a Confederate supporter from New Orleans, this revolver featured a 9-shot .42 caliber cylinder, and underneath a second barrel capable of firing a .63 caliber buckshot blast. That meant a soldier could fire off 9 bullets, then flip a switch and unleash a shotgun blast at close range. For Confederate cavalry officers, it was the ultimate backup plan, a one-gun arsenal. But it came with issues. The gun was heavy, required special ammo, and was slow to reload. In the heat of battle, it could jam, and few gunsmiths could fix it in the field. Still, its psychological impact was real. Facing someone with a LeMat meant you weren't just dodging bullets. You were risking a point-blank shotgun to the chest. It was brutal, ingenious, and totally over the top. 11. The Requa Battery Gun, the Civil War's 25-barrel volley gun. Before machine guns came along, the Union Army experimented with something even wilder, the Requa Battery Gun. Picture this, 25 rifle barrels, all lined up side by side, mounted on a frame like a miniature pipe organ. Invented by Josephus Requa, this weapon could unleash all 25 shots in a single massive volley, or fire them in rapid sequence by rotating the firing mechanism. It used standard rifle ammunition and could be reloaded fairly quickly for a weapon of its size. On the battlefield, it was mostly used to defend bridges, forts, and choke points, anywhere enemies had to approach in tight formations. One blast could shred a charging line, but it had problems too. It was bulky, hard to aim, and not very mobile. You needed a crew to load and operate it efficiently. Still, the Requa gun proved the demand for mass firepower, and it paved the way for the concept of rapid-fire support weapons in future wars. A loud, clunky monster, but devastating in the right hands. 10. The Witworth sniper rifle, the gun that could kill a general from half a mile. In a war dominated by muskets that could barely hit a barn door at 100 yards, the Witworth rifle was a precision instrument of death. Made in Britain and used by elite Confederate sharpshooters, this rifle fired a 4.5-to-1 hexagonal bullet, yes, hexagonal, through a twisted barrel that gave it incredible spin and accuracy. The result? It could hit targets over 800 yards away, more than twice the effective range of standard rifles. Union generals learned to fear it. At least one officer was picked off from over 1,400 yards by a Confederate sniper using a Witworth. It was also one of the first rifles equipped with a telescopic sight, making it a true early sniper weapon. So why wasn't it everywhere? It was expensive, imported, and hard to maintain. Only the Confederacy used it in significant numbers, and only a handful of troops could master it. But when they did, it was like giving a Civil War soldier a sniper rifle from the future. 9. The steam-powered gun, the Civil War's bullet-spewing Iron Dragon. It sounds like science fiction, but the Union Army actually tested a steam-powered machine gun in 1861. Invented by William Joslin, this bizarre weapon, nicknamed the steam gun, used pressurized steam to fire 58 caliber bullets at rapid speed. It looked like a boiler mounted on wheels, and when fired, it could reportedly launch 400 rounds per minute. That made it one of the fastest firing weapons of the entire war. If it worked, but there were problems. The gun took too long to heat up, and it was huge and hard to move. It was captured by Confederate cavalry before it ever saw combat, and they were so baffled by it, they eventually destroyed it. It never made it to the battlefield, but the idea behind it was shockingly ahead of its time. An industrial age fever dream of firepower, it was part weapon, part steampunk nightmare. 8. The Chainshot Cannon. The cannonball that ripped ships and men in half forget exploding shells. Chainshot was designed to tear things apart. It wasn't a single cannonball, but two smaller balls connected by a length of iron chain, fired together from a cannon. When launched, the balls would spin wildly through the air, the chain whipping around like a giant steel blender. It was originally used in naval warfare to shred sails and rigging, but in the Civil War it found a darker use, against infantry. Fired into groups of soldiers or cavalry, it acted like a flying buzzsaw, capable of decapitating, dismembering, or maiming multiple men in a single pass. It was gruesome, unpredictable, and hard to aim, but when it connected, the damage was horrifying. Chain shot wasn't new to warfare, but its use in Civil War land battles was rare and deeply controversial. It blurred the line between innovation and cruelty. One blast could clear a path through enemy ranks or leave a trail of mutilated bodies in its wake. 7. The Greek fire cannon, the Civil War's mysterious flame-throwing weapon. Yes, you heard that right, flamethrowers in the Civil War. Inspired by the ancient Byzantine weapon known as Greek fire, the Confederacy reportedly experimented with a flame-based cannon that could launch a stream of flammable liquid, igniting anything in its path. Though details are scarce and shrouded in legend, records from 1863 describe a compressed air cannon used to spray burning fuel, potentially built to defend key southern ports like Charleston. Some accounts say it was mounted on a rail car, others on a fixed fortification. But the result was the same, a terrifying wall of fire used to keep Union troops at bay. It likely never saw wide deployment, too risky, too unstable, and too dangerous to the crew operating it. But it showed just how desperate and inventive the South was becoming. Even if the stories were exaggerated, the idea of a flamethrower on American soil in the 1860s was real and absolutely chilling. 6. The Calorie Engine Gun. The heat-powered rifle that never should have worked. In a time when gunpowder ruled the battlefield, one inventor had a wild idea. What if you could fire bullets using heat and compressed air instead? Enter the Calorie Engine Gun, a strange, experimental weapon that used a hot air engine, also called a caloric engine, to generate pressure and shoot projectiles. No gunpowder, no explosions, just heated air driving bullets down a barrel. It was based on the same science behind early steam engines, but instead of turning wheels, it fired rounds. The concept was elegant, even futuristic, but also completely impractical. The gun needed to heat up for minutes before firing, and maintaining the right pressure was a logistical nightmare. On top of that, it lacked the velocity and range of traditional firearms. Still, it was a bold attempt to break free from the black powder paradigm, a forerunner to modern air-powered weapons and pneumatic launchers. Brilliant in theory, broken in the field. 5. The Harmonica Gun, the slide-action rifle that played with death. It looked like a musical instrument, but the Harmonica Gun didn't play tunes, it played lead. This bizarre firearm used a horizontal sliding magazine that resembled the reed plate of a harmonica. Instead of a rotating cylinder, it had a metal bar with multiple chambers, each preloaded with powder and ball. To fire, the shooter would slide the bar left or right, manually aligning the next chamber with the barrel. Some versions were pistols, others were rifles, and they could hold 7 to 10 shots before needing a reload, which was a big deal in the single-shot era. But there were major problems. The design was bulky, the sliding bar could get jammed with dirt, and if the user wasn't careful, it was possible to accidentally fire multiple chambers at once, a deadly malfunction called chain firing. Still, the Harmonica Gun was a clever innovation, a primitive attempt at creating a semi-automatic repeating firearm long before the tech was ready. Weird, dangerous, and unforgettable. 4. The Puckle Gun, the Civil War's time-traveling machine gun. Invented way back in 1718, the Puckle Gun was over a century old by the time of the Civil War, but some inventors tried to bring it back. It looked like a giant revolver mounted on a tripod, with a single barrel and a cylinder that rotated manually between shots. The operator would crank the cylinder, fire, crank again, repeat. It could fire up to 9 rounds per minute, faster than most flintlocks or muskets of its time. Though never used in battle in the 1700s, during the Civil War, similar manual crank guns were revisited as inventors scrambled to build multi-shot weapons. The Puckle Gun's design inspired more advanced weapons like the Agar gun and even the Gatling gun. It even had a weird twist. Early versions had special ammunition for Christian versus Muslim enemies, a detail bizarrely out of place by the 1860s. It was clunky, slow, and outdated, but it proved one thing: the desire to fire faster, deadlier, and without reloading never went out of style. The Hailtorm Gun, the Civil War's 88-barrel death machine. If a single shot wasn't enough, how about 88? The Hailtorm Gun, also known as the Vandenberg volley gun, was one of the Civil War's most absurd and terrifying experiments. It featured 88 barrels, mounted side by side like a twisted pipe organ. The idea? Fire all barrels at once or in controlled rows to unleash a storm of bullets, hence the name Hailstorm. It was developed by a Southern inventor and intended to defend key points like ports and railroads. In theory, it could mow down entire lines of infantry or cavalry in a single blast. But in practice, it was a disaster. The gun was enormous, difficult to reload, and required a crew to operate. Aiming it with any precision was nearly impossible. And worst of all, it rarely saw actual combat, Most were abandoned or destroyed before ever being used. Still, it showed just how desperate both sides were to create the ultimate war machine, even if it meant strapping together 88 gun barrels and hoping for the best. 2. The Gatling Gun, the birth of modern warfare. It didn't just change the Civil War, it changed warfare forever. Invented by Dr. Richard J. Gatling in 1861, the Gatling gun was the first successful crank-operated machine gun, capable of firing up to 600 rounds per minute through multiple rotating barrels. It used gravity-fed magazines and a hand crank to keep the weapon cool and firing without jamming. Gatling believed that by making war more deadly, nations would think twice before starting one. But once generals saw its power, the weapon spread like wildfire. Though the Union Army bought some units, they were rarely used in major battles, partly due to logistics and partly because officers didn't fully understand its potential. But when it was used, it was devastating. The Gatling gun was reliable, terrifying, and decades ahead of its time. It would later see heavy action in wars around the world and inspire every machine gun that followed. The Civil War may have been its proving ground, but the Gatling gun was really a weapon built for the future. 1. The Hunley Submarine, the Civil War's underwater killer. In an age of steamships and muskets, the Confederacy built something that looked like it belonged in a science fiction novel, a combat submarine. The H.L. Hunley, named after its designer, Horace Hunley, was an iron, hand-cranked submarine just over 40 feet long. Operated by a crew of 8 men, it was powered entirely by manual cranks and had a single, deadly mission: destroy Union ships from beneath the waves. On February 17, 1864, the Hunley made history by becoming the first submarine to sink an enemy warship, the Union's USS Housatonic, using a spar torpedo mounted on a long pole. But its success came at a cost. Moments after the attack, the Hunley mysteriously sank, killing the entire crew. It remained lost for over 130 years before being recovered in 2000. Though crude and dangerous, the Hunley changed everything. It proved that underwater warfare was possible, and it laid the foundation for the submarines that now rule modern navies. A Confederate secret weapon and a metal coffin wrapped in legend. 15 weapons, 15 glimpses into a war that was far stranger and far more advanced than most people ever imagined. Some of these inventions vanished into history, forgotten, buried, or dismissed as failures. But others, they became blueprints for the weapons that would define the next century of warfare: machine guns, submarines, even chemical weapons. The Civil War didn't just tear a nation apart, it quietly birthed the future of modern combat. Which of these weapons shocked you the most? Which one do you think would be unstoppable today? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the strangest chapter of American history is the one we're still discovering. Like, subscribe,